talking to V-Next Shanna. Please turn off your Wi-Fi.
Okay, well, there's Mandy. Hello, Mandy.
Hello.
How was your break?
It was good.
Yeah. Okay, how was your break?
All right.
Okay. Well, let's see, who are we missing? I've got Kay is here, and I've got Alicia's here, and I have Mandy, and I got Emma, and we've got Deshara. So we're still waiting for a few. We'll wait a couple of minutes just to make sure everybody has an opportunity to walk through the midterm. And that's what we're going to do first. We're going to walk through that, and then we will look at the exercises, and then we're going to move on to phrasal verbs today. Hello, Rachel.
Hi.
Well, that doesn't look like anybody I know. Hello, JP. Whoever that is. Suppose it's Piper. Guess he doesn't want to say. So who is this JP person here? Anonymous, I guess. Alex over here. All right, well, I guess the thing to do is kind of walk through the exam and talk about what the correct answers were and remind you, right? The first thing I want to do is, for those of you who didn't get a score as good as you would have liked, I think you were probably among those who didn't give me a call. So I keep telling people, if you have a question, you don't know what's going on, or you don't know what to do, even with the midterm, to call me and let me know. And when I look at the people who did call, they got really high scores. I suspect they got higher scores than they would have gotten if they had just tried it on their own. So I would just suggest that you get out there, and when we take the final, if you run into questions or problems, or you're not sure what the answer is, I can always ask you questions and help to guide you along. And I can also make sure that I'm looking at your questions to say, geez, these don't look right. You need to make some changes. And that way you can increase your score on the final. But don't be afraid to call me, because I haven't bitten a student in 5 years. Okay? So let us begin. Aiden, I figured that must have been you. Am I missing, who else are we missing? Michaela, I think, is not here. So I got Aiden. Oh, that's
Are you able to hear me?
Say again?
Are you able to hear me?
I am now.
Okay, good. That's it.
So we're in here, and that is Aiden here. I'm missing, Michaela isn't here yet, right? And let's see, who else? Michaela and Teresa. Oh, here comes Michaela. So she's coming in. And I'm waiting for Teresa. But it's now 5 minutes in, so let us go ahead and get started. The thing I want to do is first just go over the midterm. So I want to talk about what the answers were. But before I do that, one thing I want you to know is if you think I graded you unfairly or if I made a mistake, I don't do that when we're sitting here all together, but I'm more than happy to have you give me a call or even write me or see me in my office hours so that we can resolve any questions. I've been known to make mistakes, and I've been known to not understand what you may have meant with an answer. So if you see that I have done something incorrectly in the grading process, I encourage you to get back with me individually, and we can talk through that, make sure that we don't have any disagreements on the scores. Now, as we talked about before, you'd had an opportunity to see at least the questions in this first part. I gave you a couple of test questions, and we went over it, or practice questions, I should say, and we went over those. So I'm just going to kind of walk through here real quickly and talk about what was the error and what was the explanation. So for the first one, will he goes to the lake with us on Saturday? The error is goes. It should have been go. And the reason for it is that when we have a modal verb, like we have with will, the main verb is going to be in the base form. Now, normally he goes to the lake, that's perfectly fine, and that would be the present tense. But in this case, with will, we don't use the present tense here. It is the base form of the verb. So will he go? That would be the answer that we were looking for there. You can find it on page 165 or page 58 if you like. Another one, the next one is the dogs are my favorite kind of pet. And I think most people had this one right. Basically, it should be dogs are my favorite kind of pet, because we are basically talking about the generic or dogs in general. We're not talking about a specific set of dogs. We're talking about dogs generally. And in that case, you can look it up on page 212, but it should basically be dogs are my favorite kind of pet. The error was putting the in there. Right. On number 3, how long the storm lasted. Well, the problem here is we formed the question incorrectly. And what we should have is how long did the storm last? Now that's basically the idea that we're putting the verb, the first verb, before the subject in a question. And so in that case, we should have said, how long did, so that's the first verb, the storm, and then given that did is already in the past tense, we wouldn't have lasted in the past tense. It would have been back to the base form. You can check that out on page 150. At least that's at least one. I'm giving you a page where I know that it's been talked about. There are probably others. Byron is seeing Diane for 3 months now. Well, that's a verb tense error. It shouldn't be is seeing. because it started in the past and it's continuing till now. And so what we should have there is the past perfect progressive. Now, I wouldn't ask you to necessarily tell me that, but you should tell me that the correct answer or the correct way of stating this sentence would be Byron has been seeing Diane for 3 months now. He started 3 months ago and it continues right up until now. And given that we have that kind of a scenario, it should be has been seeing, not is seeing. The next one, you could find that on page 118. Now, in number 5, Brian wrote so good on the test that he doesn't have to take the next writing class. Well, the problem here is that we're using an adjective to describe how he wrote. And given that we have how he wrote, or we're describing the verb wrote, we need to have an adverb. And so Brian wrote so well on the test that he doesn't have to take the next writing class. And this one's interesting because you may have looked at that and looked at it and said, well, nothing seems to be wrong. And the reason nothing seems to be wrong is we oftentimes say it that way, but it really should be well, describing wrote, not good. You can look at the adverb mind map, or you can look at the adverb video that I produced before. Both of them use actually pretty much this example. It's talked about somebody did so good. Well, it really needs to be so well. Writing about dinosaurs is the best idea so far. The error here is A, it should have been the. And the reason it should have been the is because we have the superlative. The superlative is when we put EST or most, or in the case of good, we use the word best. But writing about so far, you can find that on page 211. Let's see. The team we played against was not having a chance to beat us. Looking at page 90 or page 141, this should be stated in the form the team we played against did not have. And a couple of reasons for looking at that. One is did not have a chance. We wouldn't typically use was having in American English anyway. Might have it in Indian English. I think in Indian English you would find that kind of thing all of the time. But in our case, it should be did not have a chance. So it's in the past and it is negative. So we're going to put did and then the word not and then the word have. Okay, for making a negative sentence in the past. Let's see. I watching television when the power went out. This one is something happened in the past that was interrupted by something else. I think just about everybody got this one correct. I was watching television when the power went out. Something was happening in the past and it got interrupted. You can check that out on page 134. Here's one that was, I thought, real easy, but didn't turn out to be that way. That is, Bill's dad took Bill and I to the basketball game. Well, all I was really looking for was Bill's dad took Bill and me to the basketball game. The reason for that me is that it's an object. So Bill and me is basically a direct object, and therefore we wouldn't use the subject pronoun I here. We would use the object pronoun me. Some people, it wasn't few, a number of people said Bill's dad took us to the basketball game. Well, us would be a correct object pronoun, And I believe I gave you partial credit for that, but it also said in the instructions not to change the basic intended meaning. And by changing it to us, now I don't know who the us is. I know it would be the person writing, but Bill disappears. So the idea here was I still wanted to know that Bill and me took Bill and me to the basketball game. And that's basically the answer on that one. Our class will meet on April 23rd. Why did we use on? Because we use the preposition on when we're talking about a particular day or date. And that was the case here. In would be used if we were talking about bigger things like in 2020 or in February. But if we're talking about a specific day or date, the preposition that we use is on. Okay? So that is 1 through 10. Any questions? Okay. Jumping over to part 2. Nancy Pelosi just appointed Donald Trump dictator for life. We should have Nancy Pelosi as the subject. Donald Trump is who was appointed. So that would be the direct object, and dictator for life is something renaming Donald Trump. So that would be an object complement. And that makes this a complex transitive verb. The baby slept soundly through the night. It's an intransitive verb. The baby is the subject, slept is the verb, and soundly through the night is nothing other than an adverbial that is describing how it was slept. It wasn't any kind of a subject complement, wasn't any kind of an object. It's simply kind of something acting like an adverb, describe how the baby slept. So the baby subject, slept is the verb, and the verb type is intransitive. Bob gave Doug a swift kick in the pants. Bob is the subject, gave is the verb. Doug is the indirect object. A swift kick in the pants is the thing that was given, so that is the direct object, and this would have been a ditransitive verb. Bubba shot the jukebox last night. One of my favorite country songs. I always make my wife shut up in the car whenever Bubba shot the jukebox last night comes on the radio. And none of you know about Bubba shot the jukebox. Is that right? Last spring, I had a student who says, I know it, and she knew all the words. That was a special moment. However, Bubba shot the jukebox. Bubba is the one who did the shooting. Shot is the verb. The jukebox is the thing that was shot. So it's a direct object. And essentially, this is a monotransitive verb. And Sarah looks ravishing. Sarah is the noun. Looks is the verb. And ravishing is a subject complement. Because looks is simply a linking verb in this case, or an intensive verb. She's not doing any looking, but basically this is a state of being. So in this particular case, Sarah looks ravishing. Is Sarah looks ravishing is the subject complement, and it is an intensive verb. Okay? Questions on those? Okay, so let's take another look. Explain to your students the difference between negating a sentence where the verb to be is used and sentence where other verb is used. Well, the first thing is when we have a to be verb in the present or in the past, all we have to do is put not after that be verb. I am not hungry. She was not happy. That's all you're doing with a to be verb. With a not to be verb, you're going to have to insert some kind of an auxiliary, like did. I did not go, or she did not go, as in the past tense. So the not comes right after that auxiliary verb. And you could have also said, I do not like oysters, and she does not like, or she does not write many letters. So you've got the modal, or you've got the auxiliary, then you put the not, and then you have the main verb there. So that was the explanation for that one. Similarly, explain the students the difference in sentence structure between declarative sentences and questions. The basic difference here is the verb goes before the subject in a question, and it goes after the subject when we've got a declarative sentence. Okay, so that's how that one plays out. And then finally, on number 8, you're sitting in the ESL classroom. There's really 2 mistakes here. One, you all caught the idea that will is not the only way we talk about the future. So will is one of the ways, but then you had to tell me 4 other ways, and it says so right in there. 4 ways beyond the use of will. So it could have been be going to. Sometimes we use the present tense. Sometimes we use the present progressive tense if it's coming up very soon. We also have future perfect progressive and the future progressive. So there were, if you go back to the key that talks about talking about the future, there's a list right there that tells you, here are the many ways that we talk about it, here's how it's formed, and here's what it means. So I was looking for those things. And the other thing here that's quite important is she says we use will and the present tense of the verb. Well, we don't use the present tense. And in fact, if you went back to question number 1, the very first one, it shows that same problem. Will he goes would be will, subject, and goes in the present tense, and you can tell that it isn't right. So over here, we would have exactly the same thing to say. Will he go? The main verb is in the base form. And so that would have been the 5th point, is if you caught that we really don't use the present tense with will. Okay? So that's the way it was scored. If you came in late and you missed the first part, 2 important things to note. If you think I graded you unfairly, please call me, write me, text me, come into my office hours, because I don't want us to be in disagreement about how it was scored. And sometimes I make mistakes. And so I've been known to not add up points correctly or mark you for wrong for something that I didn't understand what you meant. So you are encouraged to let me know. Don't be angry about it. At least give me the chance to understand if I did make a mistake so I can correct it. Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing is, and I'll remind you, like I remind you over and over again already, if you have questions on these things, or you don't know what the answer is, or you're not sure what I'm trying to get to, you need to call me. And when the final exam comes, you need to call me if you're not pretty sure that you've got really good answers. Okay? I'm willing to talk to you. I'm willing to help you figure out what the right answer is. I don't like tests. I think tests are not very good. And so I don't like taking them. I don't like giving them. And so what I like to think about is these tests are supposed to be a learning experience. And if I ask you a question you don't know the answer to, it's time to learn it. And you can learn it by letting me help you. Okay? So it may not be the typical way most people do tests, but I'm not typical. So that's the way we do it. Okay? All right. Enough of that. No more discussions on that unless you have errors, in which case, or unless I've made errors, in which case you really need to get in touch with me to get any points that you need. If by chance I added up the score and I gave you too many points, please do not call me. That will be my mistake and your benefit. But if I didn't give you enough points or something like that, then you need to get in touch with me so we can resolve it. Are we good? Everybody knows how to get in touch with me, right? Sweet. All right, there we go. All right, let's move on here. We're really kind of wrapping up the last couple of verb type issues. And so as we do that, we had the key 10, that was the homework for today, key 10 and key 13, I think. The first is infinitives and gerunds. And so I'm not going to go back through all of these questions. These I think you probably did okay with, but I'm more than happy to answer. If you have a question on one or more of these exercises, please stop me. But at the moment, what I want to do is just review a couple of very important things that go along with these verbs. And so, boom, here we go. First thing is, don't forget the second part of the portfolio, which is supposed to be about verbs, is due 2 weeks from today at 12:55. Okay, so you've still got 2 weeks to do it. Look over the last part that I graded and sent back to you so you can look and notice things that you need to change. But I will remind you that I am looking for 5 complete lesson plans with activities. Second, that every one of those lessons needs to present new information or new content or new educational learning. Each one. So don't go in there and say, okay, so you remember last week we talked about verbs. No, I want you to be presenting some new information, not just reviewing earlier lessons. Okay? And then this is one that I want you to try to get to, and that is to try to deliver everything in a single PDF file. If you send me 15 files, that's 15 more times more work that I got to do than I want to do. And 5 is 5 times more work than I really want to do. So I want you to get this down into one PDF if you can, but certainly get it into PDF form. Because if you put it in a Word form or a PowerPoint, then I got to convert it, and I got to move it separately, and then I got to join it all together. So a PDF file and a single PDF file, if at all possible. Okay?
Can you remind us how this one differs from the third one? They're both about verbs, isn't that right?
No, the third one is going to be about sentence structure.
Oh.
And the main difference is going to be the third one, you're going to work in pairs, and you're only going to complete one very complete lesson with all of the stuff that would go with it, all the cards or all the manipulables or realia, and you're going to be presenting that as a pair to the rest of the class.
Cool.
So this one, unlike the first one, is all verbs. I can't remember who, I think there was somebody who gave me a verb lesson in the first part, and I said, you can't use that, but you can reuse it in part 2 because you didn't get a score for it in the first part. So if you gave me a verb lesson and I told you didn't get any points because it was verbs, reuse it this time. But this should be verbs. So you could talk about verb tenses. You could talk about gerunds, infinitives. You could talk about the various tenses we could use, when to use them. We're going to be talking about phrasal verbs today. And so phrasal verbs is another topic that you'll be able to use. But what you're going to do is you're going to give me 5 lessons on verbs specifically. Okay, now, any other questions on this one?
You say, can you repeat the sentence you just said?
Can I repeat the sentence?
Yeah, you say verb, gerund, and the infinitive.
Yes, you could use gerunds. You could use verb, let's see, gerunds or infinitives. Those we'll talk about as verbs. You could use different verb tenses and talk about how to do different verb tenses. You could use phrasal verbs. So you're really kind of wide open to anything that you want to do about verbs. You could talk about present tense verbs and the fact that the third person singular has to change with an S. That'd be another good one. Or you could talk about past participles, present participles, and so forth. Okay? Rachel's got it?
Yes, thank you.
All right, very good. Okay, so let's take a quick look at special verb topics part 1. I believe that was infinitives and gerunds. And it's interesting because these are both oftentimes used as nouns or to replace nouns, particularly gerunds when we put in ing on the end of the verb. But what I want you to remember, because you're familiar with using infinitives and you're familiar with using gerunds, I'm sure, even if you weren't sure what they were called. But I want you to remember that some verbs require only an infinitive. They can only work with an infinitive. For instance, I want to go. Well, there's the infinitive, to go. And you can tell by listening when I say I want going, that doesn't sound correct. And the reason is the verb want is expecting an infinitive to follow. Now, it could be that it could be another noun. I want pancakes, or I want a new bike. But if we're going to be using one of these verb forms, I want is going to be followed by an infinitive. I want to swim. Other verbs will only work if you use gerunds. So in fact, or for instance, I enjoy fishing sounds correct to the native ear. But if I say I enjoy to fish, most of us who have listened to English all our lives realize that I enjoy to fish does not sound correct. And the reason is enjoy is much the opposite of want. It requires a gerund if you're going to have a verb form following it, and an infinitive won't work. And then there are the verbs where you can use either one. I like eating, I like to eat. There are several verbs that can go in either direction, and it's perfectly fine. But some verbs require infinitives, some require gerunds, some can use either. For those of us who've been speaking English most of our lives, we intuitively know which one is which. But when you're going to be dealing later with English language learners, you're going to find out that there's no good rule for figuring out what they are. It's mainly kind of a memorization task. And there's nobody who hates to say memorization more than me, because it's not a good learning technique. But in this particular case, there's nothing else that you can rely on. And so in that particular case, ELLs basically have to memorize these, which goes with which. There are a couple of other ones. One other interesting thing about these is when we're talking about can use either, sometimes the gerund and the infinitive are not exactly the same meaning. I think I used in my videos, I stopped smoking means something different than I stopped to smoke. If I stopped smoking, it means I stopped, I don't do it anymore. But if I stopped to smoke, it means I pulled my car over so that I could smoke. Or I stopped working so that I could smoke. So occasionally, there is a difference in those verbs. Most of the time, down here, they're going to mean the same thing, but there are a few occasions where it does not. Okay?
Oh my
Now, I'm just going to ask, did you have any questions of exercise, the exercises for 10? I'm not going to go page by page, but do you have anything?
Do you have any tips to memorize those category verbs?
Unfortunately, I don't. I don't think there is any good rule or any good process for figuring it out. Now, what you may find is some learner's dictionaries. I don't know if you've ever looked at a learner's dictionary. It's not the dictionary where you've got Mandarin in English or Korean in English or English and Spanish. But when we've got some dictionaries that are very specific, trying to help people learn English, there are a few of those that will actually show you whether you need to have a gerund or an infinitive. And that's basically the only way I can think about it. Another way could probably be, you could probably go out onto the internet and look up, use this exact title here in the Google search, infinitives versus gerunds. And it will probably get you a good list of the verbs that fall into these three categories. But once you've got that, it's basically going to be having to memorize. It's not going to be something you can reason your way through. It just doesn't work. And I hate it, but that's kind of the truth for a couple of these situations. So infinitives versus gerunds in the internet will get you a list that you can probably look up. And going through different learners' dictionaries, you may find one that actually tells you which one is required. Okay?
All right, thank you.
But that's about it. All right. So infinitives versus gerunds was special verb topics number 1. Number 3 was modals. And we've seen modals in the past, particularly with will, when we know that this kind of goes in there and it comes in front of the main verb. But there are a whole bunch of these that are out there. I know that I gave you some examples in the video that talk about the fact that there's some difference between I will do something and I would, or some verb where I would go to the wedding is different than I should go, which is different than I could go. So this group of verbs are a certain type of auxiliary verb. They're called modals. And when you see a modal, if you see a modal in a string of verbs like I should have been being beaten, there's 5 verbs in a row. I should have been being beaten. The modal is always going to be the first one. So I should have been honored. Let's say it that way. There's 4. I should have been honored. Should was the first one. I could have been given. Could was the first one. So in a string of verbs, the modal goes first. And the second point to remember, and you saw this on the test in 2 places, in a situation where there's a modal verb, the main verb will always be in its base form. You saw that on the last question on the midterm where you had to tell them, well, if you use will, it's a modal and you don't use the present tense. And you saw it on the very first question where it said, will he goes, when it should be, will he go. So not the present tense, but the base form is the main verb's form following a modal. Okay? Okay, we good? Now, that brings us to probably the shortest bunch of exercises in the book. This is key 12. Any questions on the exercises in key 12? No? All right, very good. So let's move on to one of my very favorite topics, and that is modal verbs. I didn't realize how difficult modal verbs were for English language learners until I had it pointed out to me that there are such a thing as modal verbs. I'm sorry, phrasal verbs. And a phrasal verb, also called a multi-part verb, is a verb that's going to have attached to it either a preposition or an adverb, or some cases it'll be an adverb and a preposition. So when I talk about a modal verb, it is a group of 2 or 3 words. That's the first important point about a phrasal verb. The second important point is that they have a combined meaning. When you take these words and you combine them, they don't actually add up to the sum of the parts of the phrasal verb. For instance, or maybe better, not for instance, but essentially they are idiomatic. Okay? By idiomatic, I mean that you can't take the 2 words or the 3 words together and put them together and see the obvious combination of those words and their meaning. Here's an example. Turn on the radio. Well, turn on the radio. What are you turning? Anymore, we don't do turns. We got all push buttons. How about this one? Turn on the light. If we use turn on the light, are you turning anything? No. So it's really not being turned. You flip on a light switch, perhaps, but generally there's no turning to be done in most cases. So these are idiomatic. I can't take turn and put on next to it and realize that I am applying electrical power to either a light or to a radio or to a television. So turn on, I can't go turn it on and see that I am starting the TV. That's why it's idiomatic. Now, the phrase's meaning, when I say turn on, the phrase turn on, the meaning is not made clear by just putting the parts together. You put the parts together, you don't come away with applying electrical power to the device. Now, I've got some better examples, and I want you to think about this one. Here's one that's a 3-part phrasal verb. Come down with. Come down with. Come is the verb, down in this case it's an adverb, and with is a preposition. What does come down with mean? Give me a 1-word equivalent to come down with. Anybody?
Sicken, is that close enough?
I'm sorry?
Sicken.
Sicken. Okay, that's kind of what it does. That's the one thing that I'm thinking about it means. But we could also, there are other things like catch or contract. Look at this. Phrasal verb. He came down with the flu. Did he come anywhere? No. Is it down? No. And is it with? Did he come with the flu? Did he come down from someplace higher? No. Came down with the flu. You can't say came down with add them together and say, yep, that's the same thing as caught the flu. The only reason we know that it's caught the flu is because we've probably used that more times than anything else. He came down with the flu is clearly a phrasal verb because he didn't come, he didn't move downward, and he didn't accompany the flu. But I put that whole thing together, and came down with means he caught the flu, was sickened by the flu, or he contracted the flu. Now, there are times when the same meaning or the same phrase may not be phrasal. Here the meaning is he contracted the flu or he caught the flu. How about this one? He came down with his brother. Well, guess what? This one isn't phrasal. This one, he probably did come, he came down, and he accompanied his brother, like he came down the stairs, right? You've got two little kids upstairs, he came down with his brother. He came down the stairs with his brother. Or maybe you've got you have some friends who live in Wisconsin, and your friend comes to Illinois with his brother. He came down with his brother from Wisconsin. In this case, it doesn't mean contract, it doesn't mean caught, it's very literal. He came down came down the stairs, accompanied by his brother. So that's one of the things that's a little bit tricky about phrasal verbs. Sometimes they are phrasal, which means not literal. He didn't come, he didn't down, he didn't with. In this particular case, it is non-literal. But in this case, he came down with his brothers. If it's from using the stairs or from Wisconsin, it is quite literal. So not every verb and preposition or every verb and adverb combination is going to be phrasal. It is phrasal when the individual parts don't add up to the intended meaning. Okay? When it is going to be phrasal when it is not literal. Let's take this example here. Can somebody literally run up a hill? Mandy, can somebody run up a hill?
Yes.
Yes, they can. And so this is very literally, they ran up the hill. All right, let's try this one, Aisha. Can somebody run up a bill? Can somebody literally run up a bill?
Yes. Like if they spend so much money.
Yes, but did they run?
No.
Did they up?
No. The bill went up.
Well, they made the bill go higher, but they didn't run on the bill. Now, interestingly, you look at that and you know immediately that that just means he ran up the bill, means he increased the bill or he spent a lot of money, right? But people who haven't grown up with English are not going to look at that and go, oh, he spent a lot of money. They're going to go, what does ran up the bill mean? And so ran up in one case is literal, just like Mandy said. In another case, there is no running happening with that bill. Therefore, it must not be literal. And so in one case, he ran, he used his feet, and he went up the hill, quite literally. Over here, the thing that really goes together is not the up the hill, it's the ran up. This is a phrasal verb. And they are tricky. And we use them so often and we never even think about them as native speakers that it is just real easy to use them and very easy to confuse our listeners. I had, for instance, one time when I used to work for Motorola, and we had a big global team. We pulled people from Spain, China, Singapore, Korea, Japan, Germany, England, Ireland, brought them all together and we were working on a project. And one meeting, the people from all of these other countries said, quit using so much slang. We don't understand the slang. Well, we weren't really using slang very much, but we were using these kinds of things all the time. And no matter how much or how good their English was, they had many cases had not learned these phrases. And so they are something that's going to be difficult for your students. So I'm going to let you, let's see, I think I sent you an email with a there were in the task list for today, there were 2 documents that you were supposed to bring. Did you bring them? I got a nodded head from Rachel. Aisha, did you bring them? It was in the task list. How about you, Teresa? Did you bring it? Got it. Deshara? Michaela? I don't know. You pulled it up? Okay, pull it up is just as good. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to put you into pairs. I think it might actually be groups of 3. Let's see what we get. I'm going to put you into breakout rooms. Let's just try. What happens if I do 3 breakout rooms and assign them automatically? I'm going to do that. 1, 2, very good. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to take out that piece of paper or pull it up online, and you're going to have 3 rooms out here. So take your room number, room 1, room 2, or room 3. And with your partners in there, I want you to either take the verb on exercise 1, exercise 2, or exercise 3 to match your breakout room, okay? So you take the question that matches your breakout room, and what I want you to do is think of phrases that we use these verbs in that wouldn't make sense to an English language learner, okay? I'm looking for you to come up with some phrasal verbs, as many as you can think of in 5 minutes, okay? So in 5 minutes, I want you to just come up with as many phrasal verbs as you can, where the verb in that phrasal verb is give if you're in room 1, cut if you're in room 2, and break if you're in room 3. And the idea is to make them phrasal verbs, that is idiomatic statements. Are you ready to go? Let's see how we got this split up. Good. I think the split's going to work nicely. You got 5 minutes, then we'll talk about them when we get back.
Hey,
Hi.
so he's talking about the paper that says multi-part verb or verbs. And it
No,
has,
the other one.
okay, let me look.
So our word is cut, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I see it now.
So like the phrase cut it out, like that kind of thing is what he's looking for. Right?
I think so, because that's what I was about to say. Like, that could be a sentence like, he needs to cut it out, which can be like, he's doing something bad that he needs to stop doing.
cut down on is another one, right? Like cut down on your drinking or whatever.
Right, like whatever the bad habit is.
Yeah.
We can do cut off.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like they can be cut off your phone, or if you cut someone off, or either way. What about when a director is like filming and then they say like cut? Like, is that the same as
I think so, because that's saying like stop.
stop?
Hmm.
Right.
Oh, cut in line.
Hmm.
You said cut the line, like cut a line.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Can we do cut back? It's kind of similar to cut down.
Yeah, or like if you cut back the bushes, like that's a different way of saying that. Also, cut up, like
Like you're cutting the paper.
yeah, but I was thinking like you're being funny, like
Oh, okay.
cutting up a
Everybody back? Almost. Room 3. Okay. Very good. So now that we're all back, let's see, who was in group 1? Teresa, who else was in there? Anybody?
Aiden and Michaela.
Aiden and Michaela. Okay, great. So what were some of the, did you come up with any phrasal verbs for give?
Don't give up.
Okay, give up is a good one, because what are you doing? Are you giving in any up? Even if you raise your hands, the French salute. Nope. It is, your give up is not literal, right? What else?
We also had give something away.
Give away, okay. Any others? Michaela, any yet? Michaela, you got any?
Yeah, we were discussing give it away, give up, give way, give in.
Give way is a good one. What else was it?
Give it away and give in.
Give in, give out. Okay, good. You guys got a whole bunch of them. That's great. You give in, give out. What does that mean? I mean, I could give out the final exam. That would be perfectly non-phrasal. But if I said my car is about to give out, then all of a sudden you know it. What does give out mean? Very good. Those are good ones. Okay. Who was in group 2 with the word cut? Cut. Kayla. Who else was with you?
I was.
All right. Deshara. Kayla. Deshara, what did you come up with for cut?
We said like cut off.
Cut off is a great one.
Cut.
Because when you say cut off, do you actually cut something off? In traffic, you don't cut anything, right? But cut off goes together. Very good. What else you have?
Cut up, cut down, cutting out.
Great. So cut up is a great one. So cut up, what does cut up mean as a phrasal verb? Because if you're going to tell me I cut up the carrots, that's not a phrasal verb. But if you say cut up, how could you use cut up as something not literally cutting?
Like you about to snap. Well, like in my community, if somebody say, I'm about to cut up, that means like I'm about to snap on you or something.
You're going to slap on me?
Snap
Okay.
on you, like
I'm
cuss you
sorry?
out.
Say it one more time.
Like I'm gonna cuss you out or something. Like
Oh, you're going to cuss me out?
Mhm.
How about this one? When I was a kid, people would say cut up was misbehaving. They're cutting up or he's going to cut up. Cut off was a good one in a car. Let's see. What was it? Cut off. How about cut out? Cut it out. If
Yeah,
you're going to cut it out, does that really mean you're cutting anything?
No, tell them to stop.
Great.
If you're cut up, it means you're like muscular.
Muscular?
Yeah.
I don't know anything about muscular anymore, so
They say that if you're cut.
okay. So you can see we've got a bunch of them. Cut up, misbehave, cut out. When I was a kid, everybody talked about cutting out in their cars so they'd leave rubber behind on the road. Now the tires are too expensive to play that game. And let's see, cut off in traffic, cut out the noise. You're not cutting anything, you're just stopping it, right? So there are several of these that we are very familiar with. Let's see, group 3. Okay, group 3, you had the good one, break. Who was in group 3? Aisha and Rachel, what do you have for break?
Breakdown.
Breakdown's a good one, because you didn't really necessarily break anything into pieces, right?
Right.
Sometimes it means taking it apart. That could be breakdown, and breakdown could be that your car stops working. That's good. What else?
Or like when somebody just like when they crying, they like, oh, she had a breakdown.
Breakdown. Okay, great. What else?
Breakthrough.
Something.
Breakthrough is a good one. And
Yeah.
break up is another good one. You break up, you're not really breaking things. Break has the idea of breaking things into pieces, right? And so break up is a very specific thing. I could break up my cookies and eat them by piece, but I can also break up with my girlfriends. Then my wife doesn't let me have girlfriends anymore. So I can't break up with anybody but That would be a typical way to use it. So the idea here is we have lots of verbs. When you said cut out, cut up, you may not understand cut up the way that it used to be used when I was a kid. They may never say it anymore. But think about all of these different things where we've got very strange words that don't really mean a literal thing.
Break
So
out,
just stop at that. Yes, go ahead.
break out, break in.
Break out, break in is another good one. Break out is good. I didn't think of that one. All right, so you got the idea? Phrasal verbs. Now, sometimes they are phrasal and sometimes they are not. I could say, what's a good one? Well, we tried give out. I could give out the test and that would simply be giving, and my car could give out and that would be breaking down. So we use these things so often that we tend not to even realize we're doing it around people who may not understand what we're talking about. So let's take a quick look at some of the problems that ELLs have with this and why they have them. And then we'll look at what the homework is for this week. But first off, ELLs oftentimes don't use these because they seem to be harder. Suddenly, I don't have to know just one word. I got to know 2 or 3 words and put them together just right for it to mean anything. So, for instance, they may find it much easier to use bigger single word synonyms like tolerate. I can put up with you, but they may find it easier to tolerate a single word. So there's an example. Now, I can't say put with up. I can't put down with. I can't put with down. It has to be put up with. And that's the way it's going to be. Otherwise, it doesn't mean what we want it to. So these are very difficult. Phrasal verbs are not things that happen in a lot of different languages. All languages have idioms, but they don't necessarily show up in phrasal verbs. So if a student comes from a background that doesn't have phrasal verbs, they're going to find these to be quite difficult to understand. And they'll have nothing to tie it back to make it easier. Now, here's something I want you to think about. Verbs are major contributors to meaning, right? When we're talking about a sentence, one of the big words is the verb. And usually, these adverbs or these prepositions are very minor words and you don't even pay very much attention to them. But in the case of the phrasal verbs, it's not the turn word or the verb that gets emphasized. It's this little particle, what would normally be pretty meaningless. Okay? And so if I was going to say, I am going to turn on the corner, I'd go, I'm going to turn on the corner, right? Turn, that's where the accent is. I'm going to turn on the corner. But if I'm going to talk about the light, I'm going to turn on the light. Do you hear the difference? Turn on the corner and turn on the light. In English, we usually emphasize the important words and we leave the unimportant words unemphasized. But when we do this, and I'm going to say, I'm going to turn on the light, I'm going to turn out the light, I'm going to turn down the bed, and I'm going to turn in my assignment. Notice that each one of those had the unimportant word emphasized. And so these phrasal verbs actually even impact pronunciation. Another thing, and I kind of mentioned this at the very beginning, it takes all of the words in the phrase to be in exactly the right order, to be all together for it to mean what we want it to mean. I could put up with something, or I could put up a dish in the cabinet, but it doesn't mean tolerate until I have put up with. And break. Well, my car didn't break, Normally, we wouldn't say my car broke. We normally say it broke down because it didn't fall in pieces. It just stopped working. And when couples break up, they don't really break anything. They're not breaking anything, and certainly nothing going up. So we have to use exactly the right words and the right combinations. And sometimes we can use them in different forms. I want you to think about this for a moment. I turned on the radio. You know what that means? I turned on the radio. I can also say, I turned the radio on, right? Does that mean the same thing? I turned on the radio and I turned the radio on. Both mean the same thing and they make perfectly good sense, right? Kayla, I'm looking at you, so give me a nod. Throw me a bone. Okay, very good. All right. Now look at this one. Let's say that I'm going to talk about the radio and I'm going to call it it. I turned it on, right? So you know I'm talking about the radio. Turned it on works just as well as turned on the radio or turned the radio on. But notice that we can't say turned on it. I turned it on is great. I turned on it does not mean I gave power to whatever the device is. It might mean I turned on it being a street, or turned on a driveway, but it doesn't mean the same thing. So we have some of these where it has to be in a certain sequence. Turn it on. And I'll talk about that on the next slide. But the next big problem is sometimes these phrases are polysymous. Turn in, for instance, could be that I'm going to go to bed. It could be that I'm going to be a snitch. And it could be that I'm just going to deliver, like turn in an assignment. They can be exactly the same words and have a very different meaning and still be non-literal. So one of the things that we've got to pay attention to is the idea that some of these things can be separated. I can tear up the paper, I can tear the paper up, or I can make up a lie or make a lie up. All of those work fine. Fill in the blank or fill the blank in. So sometimes we can separate the particle from the verb. What I want you to notice is, this is quite important, you'll run into this with your students, is I can't say tear up it. I can't say make up it or fill in it. I can though say tear it up, make it up, or fill it in. And basically that means that when we have a separable phrasal verb, if the object, the direct object of that is a pronoun, it has to go in the middle. Okay? Now, so I am going to stop right about there. I want to talk about the homework. You should have the other sheet is the multi-part verbs worksheet. That was the other thing that is out in the task list for this week, for next week. And so what I want to do is make sure that you're able to do that. Let's go down to number 11. If you can pull that up on your screen, or if you have it printed out, let's go down to number 11. What we're trying to do here is we're trying to look at these verbs and the preposition that come after them and decide, are these phrasal verbs, which means not literal, or are they a verb and a preposition, a literal meaning? Take a look at number 11. The partners fell out. Do you think that's phrasal or is it literal? Have you heard that? Have you ever heard that phrase before? Partners fell out?
Yes.
Great. What does it mean?
It means that they didn't get along about something, or either like it can mean like they're tired, like they just fell out and went to sleep, or they fell out during an argument.
Great. So I'm going to look at the one that you just mentioned, the fell out over an argument. in this particular case, the partners fell out. We could say exactly this means just about the same meaning and say the partners broke up. So if they have a big disagreement and they separate, that could be the partners fell out. How about the doll fell out of the window? Aisha, what do you think? Literal or phrasal? The doll fell out the window.
Literal.
Literal, because the doll is sitting there on the windowsill and it fell out. What we're doing here is going through here, and I want you to look at each one of these and make a determination. Is it a phrasal verb, meaning it's not literal, or is it a literal meaning, in which case you could just call it a verb with a prepositional phrase? Phrasal verb or verb with a prepositional phrase. That's something to work on. And again, this would be a great place to do a lesson for your English language learners in the second part of your portfolio. However, I've kept you 1 minute too long. I should be ashamed of myself. And I am. So I'm going to sit right here and I'm going to do penance by staying here until everybody else is gone. If you have a question, please stay and ask it. And if you don't, well, I guess I'll see you next month.
Hey, Professor.
All right. Bye.
Ugh.